Hey now folks, Nick here, and today we're taking a look at Infamy, published by Mercury Games and designed by Travis R. Chance. Now, what originally interested me about Infamy is that the setting is a cyberpunk dystopian future, but the game itself has Eurogame sensibilities, and that's sort of a mesh you don't see too often. But in any case, the theme of Infamy is that you take control of a freelancer, which is basically a criminal from the future who is trying to make a name for him or herself on Mars by either gaining enough reputation in one of the three major criminal organizations there, so much so that you become the head of that organization, or by gaining enough infamy points on your own that you are able to start your own criminal organization. Very cool theme, but does the game itself hold up to the strong theme? Well, let's take a look, and we'll come back and I'll let you know what I think. Alright, so I'm not going to go over every single detail of Infamy, but I am going to give you enough information to give you a broad overview of the game. So the theme of Infamy is that basically you're a small-time thug in a dystopian cyberpunk future who is trying to make a name for himself on the cities of Mars by either taking control of one of the existing criminal organizations there, or by gaining enough infamy points to become your own criminal organization. Now, each player is going to get a player board. All the player boards are the same, and they basically show the reputation tracks for each of the three criminal organizations you're trying to gain reputation in. In each different type of organization, each one gives you special powers as you gain reputation points and move up the track, and you'll use a cube on each track to keep track of those points. Whenever you gain a special power, it's either going to kick off right away, or it's going to give you a continuing benefit over the course of the game. You'll have access to every power below the level that you're currently at. Around the edges of the board, you'll have spots that you'll keep around just to indicate on the table where you should keep your different resources like compound, data, and weapons. On the other side, you'll have your available bribes, your henchmen, your favors, and spent bribes. And then on the bottom, you're actually going to have spots to keep your different completed mission cards for each of the different cartels. Now, as for the main board, as you can see out here in the center, you have the different play areas where you can actually put your workers during the worker placement phase. They're labeled from 1 through 6, and you got Bleed City, Gravity Hub, Arcadia Mining, and so on and so forth. And each player actually has a little stack of cards corresponding to each of those 6 areas. During the worker placement phase, each player is going to take one of the cards, put it face down, and then simultaneously flip, and in order are going to put out their worker, which are actually all individually cut little wooden meeples, and you're going to put your worker on one of the spaces out on the board. Depending on where you put your worker, you're going to get different effects. You might be able to gain a resource, you might complete a mission, or you might gain scheme cards, which are these 3 stacks of cards out here, one for each of the different cartels. And each of these does something a little bit different, but they basically have some game-breaking effects. So for instance, the ones for the Harada cartel. Here's one. Steal a weapon from a rival if you have less than 3 rep in cartel. Gain a rep in cartel. Vice, gain 1 compound or 1 weapon if you have completed an underworld mission. Recover 3 bribes. Whenever you see recover, that means bribes. Just an example of some of the other ones. For the Mega Core, you have security protocols, move a watchdog, remove all hazards from a sector occupied by a watchdog, gain 1 infamy for each hazard removed this way. Gain a data, move a watchdog, you may play an additional scheme this round. Now, some of the terminology on those cards. At the beginning of the game, you're going to place one of these watchdog tokens randomly on the board. This basically represents the police on Mars. You'll put it on a certain area randomly at the beginning, and no one can place their workers there during the worker placement phase. And in fact, there are some special contact abilities that may put a second one out there as well. Whenever it says resources, you basically have 3 different main resources in the game. You have weapons, which are represented by these red tokens here. You have compounds, which are basically drugs, to put it another way. And you have data. Now, you also have a couple of other resources that are actually called assets. You have favor tokens, which are very powerful things you use during the bidding phase to automatically win a bid on a contact. And you have henchmen. Now, henchmen on their own could be used for just as another resource when you're trying to complete missions, which I'll get to in a moment. But you can also trade in 2 henchmen for infamy during the night phase of the game. But we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, so let's talk about the different rounds of the game. And each player is going to have their own little cheat sheet of what happens during the setup and during the round phases. And also, I should mention this game has one of the coolest little first player type markers in the game. This means that you are the trigger man, and the trigger man often gets to act first and make decisions first during the different phases of the game. But I really, really like that gun. The first phase of the game is the contact phase. Now, you'll start off during the day phase. That's what this keeps track of, day and night. And they both function mostly the same. But during the day phase, you'll reveal 5 contacts, which I have up at the top of the board, and those are the ones you'll be bidding at first. Now, contacts come in a variety of different shapes and forms, and they all do something different. So if you win the bidding on this particular contract, the arms dealer, you're going to be able to get 2 resources. Now, here's a picture of one of the different cartels you're fighting over, and this matters for some cards, depending on what contacts you resolve, but mostly it does. Most of the time, it doesn't actually matter. The fixer gets you a favor token. The accomplice actually gets you the accomplice components, which is basically a whole other set of cards and components that you'll use just for that turn. So you get to basically put a whole other worker out, whereas the other players are only putting 1 out. The liaison is very powerful. You can either gain 2 infamy points or a rep in a faction of your choice. The sector chief is the contact I mentioned before that will let you add a watchdog and also allows you to enter sectors with a watchdog with impunity. And you have a number of different contacts that just give you more resources. The peddler lets you take 1 of your choice. The hacker lets you get 2 data. The informant lets you get scheme cards, and so on and so forth. Now, how this will actually work is that at the beginning of the game, you'll randomly choose a first player. And starting with that player, you're going to bid on every contact in that row. And you bid by using your own personal favor tokens. Now, if a favor token is unspent, it's on the, bribe token. If a bribe token is unspent, it's going to be on the briefcase side, and you'll keep it at the top of your player board. When it's spent, you flip it over to the X side, and they're gone. You can't access them again. And bribes that are spent are not recovered unless you use special cards until the end of the night phase, so basically after every 2 rounds. When you choose to bid on someone, you have to pay to play, which means you have to automatically spend a bribe, and you put it in the spent pile, in order just to put a number of bribes out on one of the contacts. Once you have a number of bribes on a contact, it goes to the next player, and the next player has to either pass, which drops them out of the bidding altogether, or choose to raise the bid, in which case they also have to spend a token and then raise by at least 1 more. And this continues until all but 1 player has passed. It's also possible for all players to pass if no one wants the effect of that contact or they want to save their bribes. In any case, when 1 player wins one of the contacts, they get the trigger man gun, and that means that they start the bidding for the next person. And this goes on until each contact has both been bid on and resolved. So you'll resolve the effect of the contact right away. After all of that is done, then you get down to the sector phase. The sector phase is when you actually, like I said before, you'll reveal these little cards and put out your workers. And you actually do it in the order of how the contacts were won. So whoever won the first contact, you'll actually leave one of these X tokens on there when you recover your spent bribes, and then you'll go and resolve those in that order. And once everyone has put a worker out, you'll put your workers out in order. So it's possible that you can actually block someone off from something that they want if they don't go first putting their worker out. If you go to spots that just have pictures of resources, it's very simple. You'll take one of those resources. So if I go to the gun in Sector 6, I'll just take a gun and put it in my own personal resource pile. But there's some spots that will give me a henchman. There are 3 particular spots in 3 different areas that correspond to one of the 3 different criminal organizations. If you go to one of those spots and you don't already have a reputation point in that particular cartel or organization, you'll immediately gain 1 rep. If you've already got rep in that faction, then instead you get to take a scheme card corresponding to that faction. But in any case, everyone's going to do that. The other option that you have is to go to one of the mission spots on the sector. Now, the mission cards are one of the main ways you're going to get infamy and reputation. Now, let's look at a mission card. So, for instance, you have Rob Blinds. The number up at the top is the sector you must go to in order to complete that mission. So in other words, you'll put your worker on the M on that spot, and you can only do that if you actually are going to complete the mission and have enough to pay for it. So here are the requirements. This one needs 3 compounds and 1 gun. Now it's kind of hard to see, but underneath the name of the mission, you have a little keyword. In this case, it's Carnage and Underworld, and that matters for the effects of some different cards. There's a little bit of flavor text, and then at the bottom you have what faction the mission belongs to, the mission that you're actually, or the organization you're completing the mission for. And then when you successfully complete this mission, you will both take the special effect here. So a rival must spend 2 bribes. That's what that means. Whenever it says spend or recover, it's bribes. And then you have your choice of either gaining a rep in the faction that's pictured or gaining 3 infamy points straight out. And that's basically how all the missions work. They'll all have special abilities with different resources. For instance, this one requires 4 guns, but also a henchman token. And you get to steal a henchman from a rival. This is for the PKD militia, and you gain either 1 rep or 4 infamy, which is actually pretty good. So once everyone's put down their workers and taken the effect of wherever their workers are going, we get down to the scheme phase. Now players can actually play those little scheme cards that they've taken, starting with the Trigger Man. You can only play 1 unless you have a special effect, and they'll take place right away. Then you have the option if it's the night phase, to trade in henchmen for infamy, check to see if there's a winner, and take your bribes that are on your contacts back into your spent pile. But you don't recover bribes unless it's actually the night phase and you're getting ready to start another day phase. After that, you replace whatever missions happen to be missing here, either because they were completed or because other players sabotaged and destroyed them. Then you flip the day-night marker over to the appropriate phase and begin it all again. You'll put out new contacts from whatever's left. And then when it gets to a new phase, you'll shuffle up. Now there's actually a total of, I believe, 13 contacts. So during 2 rounds, you're actually not going to see 3 of them because they're just going to get shuffled up again right after the night phase begins. But that's basically how the game is played. You're going to keep doing this in rounds until one player either gets and ends the round with 15 or more infamy, or with 5 or more rep in a particular corporation. Now the tiebreaker here is infamy points. So if more than one player gets to 5 reputation, it's whoever has the most infamy points. And that's how the game is played. I was very pleasantly surprised by Infamy. Now, I knew that I was going to like the concept and the theme of the game when I first saw it on Kickstarter and watching its development process, but a strong theme and concept does not necessarily make for a great game. A lot of times that theme falls apart when it comes time to actually play the game when it hits the table. The mechanics end up just not being enthralling enough to make it hit the table a second time. That is not a problem with Infamy. I've played the game 4 times now, and I would love to play it again. So that doesn't mean that it's not without its problems as I see it, but let's talk about all the things that I really like about the game. I already mentioned the theme. Now, in a way, I can make the argument that the theme is sort of just pasted on because it does have lovely artwork, but you know, for being a game about a criminal organization on Mars, it's not like there's a lot of like gang or turf wars or anything like that. That all kind of comes out through the mechanics of the bidding and going for the scheme cards and the missions, which again, you could make the argument it's pasted on, but for me, it works. I mean, you're not supposed to be a guy that's down on the street, you know, shooting people. You're, you know, trying to be the head of a criminal organization one way or the other through reputation or infamy. So in that regard, it works. You know, you're actually bidding on all of these people out on the street, which thematically is you know, again, you're bribing them. That's actually what they are. They're bribe tokens, and you're using your influence and your power and threats of violence with the weapons and such, to actually get these people to do your bidding. So that works very well with the theme. You know, and as far as the bidding goes, typically I don't like bidding in games. In fact, for me, there's been some really great games. I have a couple on my shelf, like Ristorante Italia, where the bidding is my least favorite part by far. Maybe it's just me. I'm not really great at bidding, but it doesn't really work for me. In Infamy, it works because it's handled in a little bit of a different way. I'm sure there's other games that have done this, but I've never seen one where you have to basically pay to play. You spend a bribe just to be able to use your bribe tokens to bribe a contact, which means you have sort of this all-in or all-out mentality. You really either have to go for it. You can't just be putting one on at a time and just raising in increments, because it's just going to cost you more and more bribes over time. So a smart bidder will decide right then and there, how badly do I want that contact and how much am I willing to pay? And you have to make that decision on the fly. And I really like that. You can't just go all out, however, and spend all of your bribes in the first round of bidding during the day phase, because it has to last for that night phase. So having that bit of resource management together with the bidding works very, very well. Getting these different types of resources and that tiny little bit of worker placement, just putting your guy out on a sector, that works too. You know, and I like the idea of having different spots be different things. So you can go to one of the HQ resupplies and possibly get a free rep, but if you've already been there, you're just going to get a scheme. So the different types of areas and what they do, and having to go to another separate area to get a mission, but not being able to block off the other players because you have to be able to actually get that mission. That all works well and is balanced in that regard. Component quality is really great. I love that each of the individual workers are actually differently cut. It's hard to notice at first, but it's true. All the components, the board is nice. It's got the coolest first player marker, or I should say trigger man marker, that I've ever seen. A close second would be the knife from Bloodbound, but but it doesn't really hold a candle to this. So component-wise, artwork-wise, I really love the comic book style art, the cyberpunk feel. Really, really works very, very well. As far as the game length, it's not too long. The box says 60 minutes. I think it would it's always taken us a bit longer, although we do have people that are prone to analysis paralysis. Sometimes I even get that myself, I'll admit. So, but I would count on 60 to 120 minutes sounds about right for this game. The rule books is written very well as well, and everything was pretty easy to find, and the game is not that complicated. You know, teaching is only about 10 minutes, and from there you're good to go. There's just, you know, you might have to refer to a couple things as far as the terminology, but after that, it's pretty good. Now, what I don't like about the game, and I'll say in full disclosure that the designer and I actually spoke about this on Board Game Geek about some of the issues I had with the balance, and I personally feel that reputation is really a much stronger way to win the game, and that you're more likely to win via reputation. Now, the designer disagrees with me and says that over the course of 200 games, only about 20% of the games were won by reputation, meaning that the game is actually balanced unfairly in favor of Infamy. But over 4 games, I've never seen anyone come close to winning via Infamy. It's always been reputation from the get-go, and the reason for that, I think, is the special powers. When you gain reputation in any of the factions, you gain special powers. If you gain Infamy, you don't really get any special powers. And yes, Infamy is more plentiful, there's more ways to get it and to get it faster, but by getting the special powers, the reputation players gain more resources faster, possibly more scheme cards, which a lot of which they can use to sort of stifle and keep the Infamy player from getting ahead. Now, according to the designer, it is incumbent on the Infamy players to sort of keep the reputation players in check, but that's just creating more work for the Infamy players. So now you have to worry about 2 things: getting up and being the first person to get 15 Infamy to win, but keeping other players in check. That kind of sucks. So in that regard, that is probably the major issue that I have with the game, and it's something I might just have to either play more to see how it comes out over the long period of time, or just agree to disagree with the designer and some of the other people who say it's fairly balanced. But the testament to how good this game is, though, is that I want to play it more, and I want to find out if that's true or not. So any game that keeps me coming back for more, even if it has something that I consider to be a fault, it has got to be okay in my book. If I could give one other little quibble, it might be with the scheme cards, that I feel that the scheme cards, it's not that I expected them to be super powerful, but they're maybe not as thematic as I would have liked. I think that was definitely an avenue for the game to have even more theme, to have some more fun stuff happen, but it feels like kind of wasted. I feel like the 3 different scheme cards they're different, but it never really mattered that much. So in that regard, I think that, maybe with future expansions that could be sort of expounded upon and have more varied and cooler stuff happen via that. Same thing with the missions too. Maybe the missions aren't as thematic as I would have liked. But nevertheless, the game is tight. It's a very tight, well-designed game. I really like it. Fast and fun, and I can't wait to play it again. So that is Infamy from Mercury Games. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.